welcome to South Suburban Missionary Baptist Church. My name is Reverend Melanie C. Jones, and I am your host for this month's midweek moment. As you know, every Wednesday at noon, South Suburban offers these midweek moment conversations to help us to prepare for life skills, for spiritual nourishment and fulfillment, and ways to improve our journeys. This month, August, is the month of new beginnings. It is the 8th month of the year, but it is also a month where many of us return back to school. Last year, our conversation in August focused on preparing for college and learning the processes from admissions to tuition to choosing the best college and the best fit for your journey. This year, we've decided to focus our attention towards graduate and professional schools to learn about why pursue study at the graduate or professional level. What are the needs or what are the plans? How do you prepare for this work? And also, what kinds of jobs or professions or opportunities should you expect once you receive these advanced degrees? We have already had conversations this month about law school and about medical school, and I'm excited that we turn our attention towards graduate school, and particularly as we welcome to this platform on this afternoon, Dr. Melanie Chambliss, who is the Assistant Professor of History at Columbia College, Chicago. Welcome, Dr. Chambliss.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. We're so excited again about this back to school midweek moment, and particularly excited, because we have you here to share about your journey in graduate school and your journey to becoming a professor of history, but also to earning a PhD, a Doctor of Philosophy degree. So I'll just start very casually. What led you to pursue a PhD?
So I decided that I wanted to become a professor the summer before my senior year in college. I participated in a summer research program that kind of brought together students who were maybe considering going to graduate school. And part of the program was having different professors to kind of come in and talk about their research, talk about their lives as academics. And it was my first opportunity to not just see, the finished product of the book or the article that might have been assigned in class, but also to find out more about the process for research and kind of how it fits within their teaching. And some of the professors even talked about their lives. And so it seemed like a really interesting career. And so in order to pursue becoming a college professor, I then had to do the PhD. But it was really the idea of becoming an academic that kind of drew me to graduate school.
So that really gets me excited because Dr. Chambliss and I share so many paths in terms of, obviously we're namesakes. So we have the fortunate blessing of being blessed with both being named Melanie, but we're also graduates of Howard University at HU, on the campus there in Washington, D.C. And we're also sorority line sisters, proud members of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. But what I heard from you saying is that really that energy towards the PhD was actually nurtured at the undergraduate level, which is super important. That kind of inspiration or being a part of, sometimes you don't know that you want to pursue a PhD young, but it's something that actually happens as you continue your work at the undergraduate level. And even if you pursue a master's, might discern this on the journey. I do have some questions. What are some of the prerequisites for consideration? Like, how did you prepare for the PhD?
Yeah, I think it was exactly what you're saying about valuing what your college experience was, what the different experiences you had while in college, and how that could then, translate into a graduate school application. One of the things that was recommended to me, and part of the reason why I did the summer program, was that if I was considering graduate school at all, it would look great on an application to be able to show that you've done some kind of research, not just in your classes, but also outside of them. So one of the things that I would recommend that helped me was doing either summer programs, or a lot of colleges have things like either Melanie or the McNair program, where as you're pursuing your bachelor's degree, they kind of put you in that environment of teaching you what it means to either become an academic or to pursue your doctorate. Or it's even possible, if your college doesn't have those programs, or if you are outside, if you've already graduated, to maybe be able to work as either a research assistant or a teaching assistant, kind of informally for a professor, so that you can kind of get that experience. So those were things, with the exception of like the Melanie and McNair program that I did while I was an undergrad. I was a research assistant for a professor, and I also did 2 summer programs by the time that I applied to graduate school. And so that also helped me, as you said, to discern the fact that, okay, I feel like this is something I could see myself doing over the long term. In terms of, I think the question was, what other considerations or what other prerequisites are there for graduate school? You shouldn't need a master's for most programs. Many programs, you earn the master's and pursue the PhD, so don't necessarily feel like you would be discounted if you don't have that extra degree. But I think the main thing is kind of demonstrating that you have the interest in research. Usually there's some kind of either writing sample or proposal that you have to submit with the application. And so they're looking to see how you think through a project, how you think through the research process, usually with the expectation that your ideas will change over the course of graduate school about what your research might ultimately be about, but still putting yourself in that environment where you're thinking about what research is, whether or not you're interested in it, what fields you want to be in. Like, those are all ways in which you can prepare for it.
Absolutely. I think in order to really give value to our conversation, for folks who are unfamiliar with the terms that we're even saying, like PhD, what is a PhD? It is a doctor of philosophy. So some folks might be familiar with the JD, or Doctor of Juris Doctorate, which focuses on law, or Doctor of Medicine, which is an MD. A PhD is a Doctor of Philosophy. That is a research-centered degree, right? So interested in not only taking these big questions that we have, intellectual questions that we have, but really finding sources, finding conversation partners, looking at the longer lineage by which these questions emerge, and thinking about some ways in which we might bring history or the context of, again, these questions in themselves to our contemporary moment. What relevance might they have for the current, or how might this research help us to deal with or solve some problems that we might be dealing with, or learn from today? So for folks who are saying, what is a PhD? A Doctor of Philosophy. Usually it is a terminal degree, meaning it is that final degree that's necessary for that particular profession. So you might pursue this at the undergraduate level in that discipline. You might pursue a master, but you don't have to. But usually the PhD would be the end of this journey in many ways, and the highest recognition that you could earn in that particular discipline. I want to talk a little bit more about choosing a good graduate school. How do you choose a graduate school?
Yeah, there are a mix of strategies. One of the things that you could do, especially if you're still in college, is ask your professors, like, what are the top programs in the field that you're considering going into, or looking into what schools have the best reputation. Maybe there are faculty members who are particularly supportive or doing really innovative research in the way, in whatever direction you're interested in going in. And also looking at your own bookshelf. Like, are there scholars that you have really enjoyed reading their work, or really appreciate their approach to certain subjects that you would like to work with? A little bit later, we will talk about how graduate school kind of informs your career, or who you are post the terminal degree. But those kinds of questions can really shape the kind of experience that you have in graduate school, the kinds of things that you read, the people that you meet, the programs that you're involved in. And so those things can be really important factors for what it looks like to choose. Like a good graduate school is a really subjective one. It can be a really subjective term, but ranking can be really important and fit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this question about fit is super important because, unlike some of the other disciplines with work towards a PhD in particular, the questions, it seems, of what kind of discipline you want to study. Is that discipline offered, or is that subject offered in that particular university at the PhD level? So, right, does that do they offer a PhD in that particular discipline? And this question about who you might want to work with, right? Are those people that you're reading, do they have spaces where they're teaching and training scholars or training the next group of folks in that particular discipline or field that might be a place of entry for you as well?
And
Mhm.
I should add, one of the things that you could do as you're thinking about who you might want to work with is sending an email to that person and seeing if it's possible to be able to set up a conversation, because the fit could be just as much the department, the university, as it is the faculty that you might work with. So that's another way to not necessarily think about what's a good school, but what will be a good experience for you.
Absolutely. Let's talk about costs, right? School costs. There are fees and tuition and all that associated, but what are the typical costs associated with graduate school?
I think PhD programs can really vary, but a lot of people that I know who went on to pursue academia usually were in PhD programs where they offered you some kind of stipend. Not every program does that, so that's definitely something to consider when you're thinking about what's the right fit for you, whether or not you can pursue a degree on the kind of stipend that they might be able to give you. But usually there are other opportunities, whether it's fellowships or some kind of graduate employment that can help to supplement that. But many programs do give you something, and so that's one of the things that can offset what would be just life costs that go along with the amount of time that you have to devote to earning the PhD, which could easily be 6 years or more. But otherwise, with masters, I think there's more of a tuition cost to it. With PhD programs, the tuition is usually paid for based on your teaching. So they'll spend a certain number of years in coursework and then a certain number of years teaching, depending upon your program. And so that helps to offset your tuition. Other things to keep in mind is that if you're debating whether or not you want to do master's degree versus PhD, a lot of PhD programs, you earn the master's and pursue the PhD, which I think I mentioned before. So that's one of the ways in which you can also manage the costs that go along with higher education. But it definitely is something that's worth looking into as you're applying to schools, because you have a lot of options there.
Yeah, yeah. I think I want to reiterate for folks that at the top tier of PhD programs, you want to pursue programs that fully cover your tuition in exchange for your teaching, usually, but programs that also could accompany that full tuition with a stipend that will help sustain the journey. Again, 6 years plus is usually the timeline for PhD, and it varies based upon your availability to complete the work. And if you have additional jobs, other responsibilities, that could certainly slow down the time by which you're able to completely finish your program. So that's always a consideration to choose a program that offers as much funding as possible, and you may be able to supplement that funding with awards, with scholarships, with other fellowships, and so forth. But that initial sense of security for 5 or 6 years is super important as you begin to start. It should be the sense that you are being trained at the highest levels, so hopefully the institution is supporting that work.
And I think that's another point to emphasize the length of time that that funding is available for. You should also pay attention to how much time they give you, because as Melanie had said, that if you are burdened with all of these other tasks, that can prevent you from even finishing the program. So definitely paying attention to that.
Yeah. What's the biggest misconception about graduate school?
I think the biggest misperception about graduate school is very similar to what I think is the biggest misperception about academia, that it is intuitive, that you can kind of figure it out. Like if you're used to navigating college and kind of having your set of requirements, graduate school can have that very like almost perfunctory feel of like, okay, checking the boxes. But I feel like there's a set of requirements that you need in order to graduate. And then it almost feels like there's this invisible list of what you need to be a professional. And so being able to work between those two different lists is really important for being able to move successfully from graduate school into your professional career. And so making sure that you have those conversations either with mentors or with other people in, your peers in graduate programs, have those conversations at conferences so that they're helping you to understand both aspects of what that period is about. So don't assume that if you're doing everything that you need to graduate, that means you're doing everything you need to do. There are other things outside of that you should make sure that you're aware of as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is one of the reasons why we're having this very conversation, is because in many ways at these professional schools and graduate schools, some things are written down, explained well. There's a pattern, there's a portfolio given, and you can follow the journey along. There are tons of unwritten rules, codes, unspoken expectations that you need folks to help to guide you by sharing their information and sharing their knowledge. And hopefully, this offers some more insight into that process as well. How does how did or does your graduate school training inform your career?
And your graduate school, I think you used the right word for it. It trains you, but it also credentializes you. Like the question that you were asking before about what does a good graduate school do? Like while on the one hand, it is about the personal fit that you have. On the other hand, there are certain expectations about who you might work with or how that person might train you, and then how your work might be read as you go out on the job market, especially if you're planning to go into academia, like in a professional sense or in the academic sense. And so in that way, graduate school feels like it's as much about teaching you the process for how to do the research, familiarizing you with the language, with the scholars, but it's also in some ways it credentializes you, it marks you in a certain way so that you can be easily read to your colleagues about what they can expect from you as a scholar, what you might be interested in based on where you chose to attend. So for me, I did my PhD in African American Studies. So as much as I am a professor of history, I also take pride in being like an interdisciplinary scholar. And so I feel like that exposure is one of the things that also marks me as a scholar. It's one of the things that has informed the questions that I ask. And so I think that training is an important consideration about what you want to be exposed to, but also how you all want to be read. And so I think that kind of mentorship is also another way of kind of understanding the choices that you make, whether it's talking to former professors or talking to people who are in the field about what your graduate school training might communicate about you, about who you are as a scholar, in addition to what you produce as a scholar in your own right.
Absolutely. I think that's so important in relation to this sense that PhD is about a research degree, but it's also about the making of scholars and credentializing you in a way to be somewhat of an expert on your particular area of study. So if that is not all history, but maybe 20th century, or not all African American studies, but maybe African American archives, but not all, African American religion, but maybe Black church, right? So there are ways that there is some expert advice that you can give or expert knowledge that you can share on your particular area of study, and you train these additional years in order to be able to show up in these conversations and in these spaces, and ultimately to write the literature that shapes, right, conversation and debates about these experiences.
Right. I think one of the questions about the benefits of the PhD is being able to build knowledge. So that's the other exciting part about, what graduate school gives you or how it informs you. It also shapes, what you then are able to produce or what you become known for. So all of those things, the benefit of a PhD would definitely be the fact that then you get to be able to take everything that you've learned and try to figure out like what questions haven't been asked, what things need to be said, what ideas need to be explored further. And it's particularly the case if you're doing anything that's within like marginalized histories or communities, that you then get to tell the kind of stories that that really can shape the way in which people see themselves, ways in which communities kind of understand their past, their history. And so that's one of the things that interests me about my work. But people feel the same way if they go into the sciences, like the possibility that the work that you're doing is for the greater public good. Uh, that said, one of the benefits of the PhD, or why choose to go to graduate school, really is one of the things that I regularly tell people is that you should only pursue a PhD if it's absolutely necessary for your career. Like, as wonderful as it is and the great work that you can do in terms of building knowledge, teaching students, if it's not something that you absolutely see as necessary for your degree or seeing as necessary for your career, it may not be the best use of your time. Like, PhDs are, as we've said, a 6+ year commitment. The stipend that they give, if universities give you those, are livable at best, but it may not be, something that works for your finances. And so there are a lot of questions that go into how, what's the cost benefit of this amount of time that I devote towards this. So I think the PhD is great if you need the highest terminal degree, as Melanie said, in your field to prepare you for whether it's going into academia, whether it's teaching or perhaps university administration, or if it's going into public intellectual work. Like, there are a lot of different things that you can do with a PhD, and you should also explore as you're thinking about whether or not you do graduate school. But there are significant, either not necessarily risks, but there are things to be aware of that should inform the seriousness with which you take, like, do I really want to do a PhD? And hopefully programs like this one help to inform the process for going about that, as well as we said, the benefits for it. And so becoming an academic, it's definitely the expectation because it teaches you how to research. But if it's not that specific of a field or not that specific of a career decision, it's worth debating.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think, in terms of this question, if it is not something that you have to do, please consider otherwise, because it is more than just having a doctor before your name. There's a whole laundry list of expectations. And I think that moves to this question of benefits that we're kind of ending our conversation on, but also this sense of there are multiplicity of things that people can do with a PhD. Certainly teaching, like you are at Columbia College Chicago, but there are also other ways in which you might be able to offer your expertise in research in a particular area which you're studying to organizations, to nonprofits, to many, many sectors that can be informative for the work that folks do in the world, for sure.
And I think that's also part of hopefully the mentorship and conversations that are increasingly happening in a lot of PhD programs to prepare their students, not just for the academic route, but also for all of these careers. So if you do decide to go into a program, those are definitely conversations to have, because that might be more of the invisible list than necessarily what the actual degree requirements prepare you for. So it's definitely worth looking into.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Chambliss. It has been a pleasure. And thank you to everyone that has joined us today. This is our back to school midweek moment focusing on graduate and professional schools. You can follow South Suburban MB Church on YouTube at SSMBC. Follow us on Facebook at SSMB Church. You can sign up for our updates at southsuburbanmbchurch.org, or you can send any donations at paypal.me/SSMBC. Thank you again, Dr. Chambliss. This was wonderful, and we're hopeful that this will certainly be a gift for all those who might be interested in pursuing the PhD. Thank you again.
Thank you.